여기. 자. 아니야. 누가 쳐야 되는 거야?
Hello. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, I was expecting a hello back. See how cheery you guys were, but I heard it in my head, like I do with a lot of other things. I think what is clear today is that a lot of people die in need of an organ when they don't actually need to. Every 90 minutes in the United States of America, someone on the waiting list for an organ dies. So by the end of this debate, or a little bit after, someone would have died on the waiting list because they could not get an organ. Now this is under the status quo with the current organ donation systems. So I think what this debate is clear about is finding a kind of solution so that people who are sick through their fault or through no fault or whatever, we don't really care. But if I need an organ, can I be able to get an organ? And what we are going to propose on this side of the house, under the topic that we will allow organ trading for profit, is for people who have healthy organs to sell it to people who don't have healthy organs for money. What I will do is I will present a model and talk about how we presume this will happen. Then I will present two arguments. Firstly, the argument on bodily integrity and why people have the right to do whatever they want for their own bodies. And secondly, how this will reduce harm and problems already in the status quo. My second speaker, Jennifer, will talk about the... Hey, this is equal opportunity. Boys can have girls' names. Jennifer will talk about the secondary harms associated how this encourages other issues and problems that are tied in to it. He will also, or she will also go on to talk about the role of the state. So let's talk about the model very quickly. Firstly, we say what we need to do is set up national organ brokerages. Institutions that are basically based around their job is to, one, certify the source of the organ, making sure it's somebody who willingly volunteers it, they know the blood type of the person, whether the person is disease-free and all those things. Secondly, that this is done voluntarily. And thirdly, the person understands the risks associated with it. And this is done the same way anybody who talks to a doctor and the doctor will explain to you the risks associated with doing something serious and making sure that that person does that thing willingly. Yes?
That's exactly what's being done in the state of Florida, in which they have a 20 times higher rate of organ donation that is successful than any other states in the United States of America.
But we will allow people to sell it. So if I can go to this brokerage and I say, I'm going to give out my kidney, and what's the going price for a kidney, they can either give them a amount and say, a kidney goes for 75,000 won. It's pretty cheap. So maybe $75,000. Or it can be like an auction system where people can bid for it based on their suitability towards it. Either way, we don't care. As long as the person involved in it has some say over how much I'm willing to charge for my body, and the person who's buying from it can buy from somewhere. Now, what we don't think this will eradicate the black market, but we think this will reduce it largely, because this gives an avenue to people who want to buy organs, a legal, safe way to buy it, and we think people will do it because it's safer, and people will do it because it will eventually be cheaper. We think this can also happen parallel to organ donation. Most of the people who donate organs in the status quo do that when they die, so this won't really affect those people. Or when they donate organs when they are alive, they donate to family members or to friends, and they usually don't charge family members and friends unless you're from my family, but then, you know. Moving on to the notion, to my two arguments that I will present today. Firstly, the argument on bodily integrity, on two parts. Firstly, we strongly believe on this side of the house that individuals are the ultimate owners of their own bodies. I get to do whatever I want to my body. We say governments only restrict when you harm someone else, not when you harm yourselves. Governments say you can smoke, Government say you can overeat. Government say you can debate 3 rounds a day in KNC. Government say you can do all these things that could potentially harm yourself in the short term and in the long term. And we say that is consistent with this view. So if I understand the risks of donating my organ, and in a safe medical environment, those risks are not very high. Most people who donate their organs while they are alive go on to live very long lives, especially if they have access to dialysis. And even people who receive this with drug, with rejection, no thank you ma'am, rejection, disease, availabilities and all, the medical resources are there to ensure people can do this safely. And we say that we support the right of people's body integrity. Secondly, we say we also, in society, recognize the right of people to use their bodies to improve their situation. And this could be anything from you wanting to be an athlete and overwork yourself, to people who don't have other opportunities and take up jobs that are dirty, dangerous, and undesirable, like working in coal mines, working on oil platforms, or working harder than most other people, i.e. the average Korean high school student, in order to improve their well-being. And we say this is, again, completely consistent with that situation. If I choose to sell my kidney for a chance to save, maybe give my mother heart surgery, because that thing is expensive anyway, or pay my way to college and ensure I get a good job, it improves my quality of life. We say that that is a choice that that individual should be allowed to make for themselves, and nobody on the other side should say, we know better than you because maybe you are too poor to decide for yourself, you can't do this. We think that's a problem. No, thank you. Secondly, we say this will reduce the harm in the status quo. There are very big harms in the status quo. The number one harm is people die. And we think that's a big problem. People die when there are other people who are willing to say, you know, if I get some kind of what's in it for me, if you get my kidney and you go on to live, you're a rich person, you know, you work for AIG, you bankrupt, but people gave you money anyway, right? And then you want an organ, why should I give you mine for free? Give me some of your money and then I will give you my organ. And we think that situation is something that we can change. We can save people who are willing to pay money and people who are capable to pay money and people who are willing to give money. Both of these people will live happily. And secondly, we say there are many other issues associated with like organ theft, trickery, and all those things that can be solved under this situation. We're not opening up and saying everybody does everything. We've given you a system. Regulation has time and time again gone on to prove to work much better in a situation where there is a huge demand and there is a huge need, people who are willing to fulfill the demand, i.e. a situation in prostitution, like many regulated prostitution environments, i.e. in the Netherlands or in Sydney or many other much enlightened places in the world have shown they can work. They significantly reduce the amount of harm that the people who participate in the situation go under. They reduce the risk of disease that people go under. They ensure a far greater amount of voluntariness, and much more to our side, we believe the empowerment of people's choices over their body. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we strongly uphold the stance that this will increase the quality of life of both donor and recipient. I told you how it will improve people's ownership over their body and reduce the harm in the status quo. And Jennifer will come up here and rock the show.
All right, thank you. Now I'd like to invite the leader of opposition to start their debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, my pleasure to be giving a speech in front of you. Now, what the government has come up here and said is that the whole issue in this debate is whether if somebody needs an organ, can that person get an organ? Now, what Logan has been trying to say during his speech is that with their model, they can. What they are missing is, however, with their model and with enough money, especially in America, with enough money to overbuy anybody else, you can have an organ. Ladies and gentlemen, how many people and which part of the society will be benefiting from this model is the biggest issue. And from the opposition, we say this is highly unacceptable, and therefore the government should not be passing this deal. So let's go into what Logan has been saying in his speech. First of all, he talks about the model saying that there will be a national organ distribution center which will have the database and quick access and interaction with everybody else in the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, this is exactly the model they have in Florida for organ donation, not trading. And in Florida, they have 20 times better chance and better success rate of organ transplantation and better survival rates as well than any other state. So this proves, first of all, that maybe the organ trading itself is not necessary. And on the other hand, secondly, that in other states, seeing that other states are not able to do it or not willing to do it, shows that on a national scale, it might be just too big for the government to have the enough regulation and make sure that people can actually follow the routes and not go into the black market. Yes, Peter?
Well, that's exactly why we're simply having the government accredit institutions like organ banks which will handle this. It's a dispersed and localized model where the individual banks handle it. It will be very efficient.
Well, seeing what your government has been doing with the CIA itself, I don't think the government's accreditation to another company or another hospital with their own personal means and will to make more money out of other people's organs is going to be enough accreditation for people's lives, ladies and gentlemen. So let's look into other arguments that Logan brought up. He talked about bodily integrity, how the government does not help you or actually stop you from smoking, drinking, debating 3 rounds a day. True. However, what he has actually omitted from his argument is that the government does not let everybody kill themselves, anybody do things that is irreversible, and that is the biggest point. I learned this from you. Sit down, sir. We say that the irreversible choices are not really choices, and Kylie will actually elaborate on this on her third argument. But to give a quick rebuttal, we say the government should not be crossing the line of giving this choice, for example, for people to sell their body, sell their heart, sell their brain, and not exist anymore for monetary reasons, ladies and gentlemen. Thirdly, there on the argument of reducing harm in the status quo. Of course, Logan ran out of time because he was cracking jokes up here. But to review this a little quickly, first of all, how much harm is there in the status quo? They have not been able to tell us. How much people are actually dying in the status quo? They have not told us. And how much harm will they actually be able to reduce, ladies and gentlemen? They have not been able to tell us. There has not been a single example from the government team today that has been able to tell us that organ trading will actually create more lives than deaths, ladies and gentlemen. On the other hand, on the opposition, we'd like to give you a fair and very clear counterplan, which is the Singaporean model of mandatory organ donation. Ladies and gentlemen, in Singapore, at the status quo, the average individual, unless you're Muslim, of course, but anyway, in Singapore, citizens that are 21 years old to 60 years old are presumed, I know you hate them, sit down, are presumed to donate vital organs at death, ladies and gentlemen. We believe this is quite fair. If you want somebody else's organ in the future, you should be able to, and willing to give your own organ, and this is a fair trade. So, with this, we'd like to go into our debate. First of all, I'll be talking about the tangible harms of the government model and why this is not necessary. Secondly, Kyle will come up here and talk about how this unfairly benefits the rich, and therefore the government should not be supporting this model. And thirdly, she will talk about the choice. Let's hear it.
Yes, but in both your rebuttal and your constructive, you've ignored the benefit to the person who is selling the organ and getting money to better his or her life.
Okay, the person who is selling the organ at a proper clinic, at a proper accredited government, this leads to my argument actually, proper government accredited hospital and gets the proper money at a fair transaction will be benefiting. Yes, we understand that. However, ladies and gentlemen, looking at the population of the United States, looking at the people who are in the very bottom rank of the United States economic structure, we can see that clearly there are people that are going to be forced into this issue and be forced into the black market, saying that you just have to give me a kidney and maybe I'll be able to give you $2,000, which will feed your family for the next 5 years. I don't know. For the people that are going into these black markets, the government has no way to stop them. Why? Because most of these people are people that are illegal migrant workers, people that don't have legal ways to go to the government and say that they actually took my kidney and just gave me $50 for it. I don't think that's fair. They'll be just kicked back out of the United States of America. So that was one of the harms that I was going to talk about. But other issues, ladies and gentlemen, are things like regulation. How in the world does the government actually make sure that this specific heart came from this person that is actually about to die, or is still living according to some parts of arguments, and is still happy, and therefore was able to give money to his family, and make sure that this heart was actually belonging to a person who made a willing for choice. The fact of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, the government has been trying to make a picture of the debate into an organ, into just kidney or cornea, as if people are all going to be alive and happy and living happily ever after. But the issue is the most valuable organs, the ones that are priced the highest, the people that are going to get the most money out of these organ transplants and organ trading actions will be people who will be losing their lives, ladies and gentlemen. People who are around the people who will be about to lose their lives. This not only means that the person who has died or who was about to die did not, or maybe not have been able to show their own will because they were brain dead, because they didn't speak English, or just because they were at a black market, ladies and gentlemen. But in the end, when this whole thing happens, the government has no way going back. The government has been able to give a choice, open up the doors and tell people that you are allowed to get money for your heart. But the government has no other way to go back and make sure that this heart came from the true heart of the person that was willing to give. So ladies and gentlemen, we tell you that this motion is dangerous and the government should be ashamed for their support. Thank you.
And the leader of opposition for her speech. In the debate, by 5 minutes.
Alright, first of all, we have to get one thing clear. In the status quo, we already have black markets where people are basically forced or tricked into selling or basically having their organs cut out of themselves and being sold in the status quo. As the government, we're trying to create a policy in which this black market could actually be, I guess, regulated or basically be legalized for us basically to express or exercise our individual rights of freedom of choice. Now, the opposition side is clearly stating or understating the government's policy, stating that if we allow this policy to happen, people will all of a sudden be forced to give their organs up. No, ladies and gentlemen, this is not what's going to happen. People have the right to choose whether or not they want to sell their organs to better their lives. That's the basic stance of the government side. But the opposition side is clearly just giving you a straw man case. They're not looking at what actually the benefits are of our policy, but they're creating a hypothetical situation that doesn't exist in the first place. So they're basically enforcing an idea that people will be forced to sell their organs, but that's not the case. We have already gave you a system in which a regulated institution will basically be screening the process in which these organs, if they're allowed to be sold on the market or traded in the market or not. So we already have a regulatory system in which that can screen or can handle whether or not these people are being forced of their will to basically trade their organs or not. So I don't see how the opposition side is keep on constantly coming up and telling us the fact that we're going to be forcing people to donate their organs or basically sell their organs. What do you have to say about that?
So if you have a heart from a black market and another heart from a proper market, how are you going to tell which one is which if it gets mixed up?
Well, obviously, the black market, we already have people being killed in the streets of third world developing countries, basically black markets. We already have that situation going on right now. But what we want to do is we want to make sure that this person is not being tricked into selling their organs, is not being deceived into basically selling their organs, but actually make this process a little more cleaner than it is in the status quo. That is basically what we're trying to do. With their model, in the status quo, without a regulatory system, people being tricked, people being deceived to go into the black market, or basically not even going into the black market, being kidnapped and basically having their hearts cut out and sold for profit that won't even benefit themselves. That's what's happening in the status quo. You have to clearly distinguish that fact with our policy. And their policy regarding, please sit down, man, regarding mandatory, I guess, forced, selling or basically donation of organs will not work, or basically has more risks than the policy that the government side is presenting to you today. Basically for this reason, we have a lot of people who don't necessarily have the freedom of choice to basically consent to the fact that they want to have their organs sold or traded in the market if we have their policy. Why? Because it's mandatory. People do not have that choice to choose. On the other side, the government side, we have a policy in which people have the right to choose whether or not their organs will be traded on the market. That's the big distinction between their model and our model. So as, I guess, reasonable people, all of you out there, I want you guys to basically understand the simple fact that there are more risks involved with their policy rather than ours. So with that said, I'd like to go on to basically my 2 points. Or basically, I'd like to take one more point.
But the Singaporean model, sir, says that you can opt out of the system as long as you don't want an organ. What do you have to say to that?
You can opt out of the system if you don't want to have an organ. Basically, ladies and gentlemen, with that even said, basically what they're doing is they're basically forcing people to give up something, whether or not they wish to do so or not. So as a result of that, basically we're still forcing people into giving up their organs one way or another because it's mandatory, a mandatory system. So ladies and gentlemen, they rebutted against the first argument, basically saying that the government doesn't have the right to basically tell basically has the right to tell people to do certain things or don't do certain things. But we also want to mention the fact that smoking also kills too. Yet the government still allows this to happen. So their argument regarding their rebuttal against their first argument pretty much falls. And I basically rebutted it against their model, the Singaporean model, which is a mandatory system. So with that said, I want to go on to my arguments, which will basically be rebutting against their first argument regarding the harms of our model. First argument, regarding the secondary harms. I'd like to talk about how this black market situation that's currently in the status quo will be improved. We have cases in Amsterdam, basically, where prostitution and drugs are basically legalized. Now, in a situation in a black market as it is in the status quo, without government regulation, what do we have? Prostitution, drugs. Who are they regulated by? They're regulated by the local mafia. What happens then? You have constant crime, constant violence, constant human rights violations of those people who are selling their bodies in prostitution and basically selling drugs. So what do we have right now in the status quo? We do not have a regulated system that can basically take care of the problem of the black market. Please sit down, all of you. In the case of Amsterdam, prostitution legalized, drugs to a certain extent, marijuana legalized, and what do we have? We have a more cleaner, more efficient system where STDs are reduced. We know whether or not these people are basically spreading diseases, or basically we can mitigate the harms of the black market, basically mitigate the harms of people being tricked and deceived into selling their organs against their will if we have a regulated open system that's regulated by the government. That's the policy that we're trying to go ahead with today. So regarding that matter, their argument regarding the black market completely falls because of the fact that the black market situation will be mitigated with the policy that the government side is presenting. Now, second of all, regarding the secondary harms, they're going to think about a situation. Think about a situation in which you're going to a third world developing country to basically receive an illegal organ donor transplant. It's not regulated by anyone. You're basically just given a broker who doesn't have any expertise in this area, and basically he's promising you to give you an organ, say a kidney or whatever it is. In this case, what could happen? You don't have a regulated authority that's basically making the decisions of whether or not this organ donation or organ transplant will actually occur, number one. And basically, if this person, the donor or the organ recipient, is going to receive that organ in the first place. If we have this system, we will basically be able to mitigate the problems associated with trickery and deceit, once again. Now, going on to the role of state. Now, this side of the house is basically saying that the government should not interfere with the decisions of the people if it basically does not harm anyone else. And that's basically the stance of the government side. And what we want to say about this is basically this. We have a win-win situation in which the organ donor as well as the organ recipient can basically mutually benefit from this policy, ladies and gentlemen. Obviously, we have a shortage of organs in the world today. Every 90 minutes, basically, or 90 seconds, or whatever it was, basically one person is going to die because they don't receive an organ transplant. If we make this policy happen, with increased organ donations and organs being traded as commodities on the market, we can basically mitigate or resolve this problem by allowing organ donors to benefit by receiving a profit and saving lives of those who are receiving those organs. Now, they say that the rich people will only benefit, but this is not the case. If we can have the rich people buy the commoditized organs on the market, then the organs that are already voluntarily donated will go to the poor people, right? So as a result of these arguments, I believe that the government side has provided you with a substantial case, and we have a more winning side. Thank you.
Prime Minister for his speech to lead the debate led by the Deputy Leader of Opposition,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When you have a group of people that have the luxury of talking to you about choice, you are an individual. You have the right to choose. Choice is all about you, you. They forget to mention one thing, that if you're not in the luxury or in the position of us, where we can go and buy our Apple iPods, we can buy our Mac computers, we are of a standard of living where we do have all these choices and benefits. If you're in the third world and you're poor, you don't have choices. You can't even get food on the table. You can't feed your kids. You can't give them the education that you want. And what happens? You end up being coerced. You're coerced into selling your organs. You may be coerced into prostitution. You're coerced into all of these things. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is not choice. That's coercion. Just because someone doesn't put a gun to your head and say you have to do this, doesn't mean that you chose to voluntarily do this. And what people call this is called structural violence. It doesn't solve the root problem of society. It's a structural violence. It's a violence within society, within the structure of the system, that makes you ingrained in poverty, keeps you in poverty. And once you sell your organ, your kidney, what next? After that bag of rice that you received as compensation to sell an organ, what are you going to do when that rice is gone? What next are you going to sell? The problem is, this is not a matter of choice, and that's why we on the opposition are proud to oppose. We've already told you about the harms, which I will elaborate. I'll take you in a minute. I will not now elaborate more into our new argument about choice, and our last argument, how this only benefits the rich. If they talk about how we're not addressing the benefits it gives to people who need those organs, a lot of the times the people who get those organs are from first world countries. Yes, sir.
Firstly, you're assuming all poor people are stupid. But with mandatory organ donation in Singapore, hundreds of people on the waiting list die because you don't get an organ until someone dies or someone is brain dead. How do you get young organs and not organs from 85-year-old brain dead people?
First of all, just because you're poor doesn't mean you're stupid, but it does mean you may lack basic education. And when they talk about the willingness and voluntariness of these people who want to give their organs, the problem is that a lot of times doctors don't explain very clearly the risks involved in invasive surgeries where they cut parts of you open and take organs out of you. A lot of times they don't provide you that information. So how can you say that even if you're not stupid, even if you don't have the education, how can you ensure in your policy that all doctors will follow a checklist where the person who is involved in donating the organ knows all of the risks involved? You can't, and you never elaborated that. So I would now like to move on to our arguments and then move on to our rebuttals. Please sit down and rotate with you. So as I've already told, please sit down. So I've already told you about choice and willingness and poverty, that people don't have certain choices. You see this highlighted especially in terms of women's and quotas. A lot of times people say because there's a glass ceiling, even if there is improved equality, that doesn't mean the structure of the system changes. Women are still discriminated in implicit ways. Even if a woman and a man have the same qualification, a man is obviously going to be hired more likely because the people in power are men. So we can see that in terms of structural violence, unless it can solve the root problem of this violence, it doesn't really benefit anyone. Why? Because people who voluntarily give these organs don't improve their standard of living, even though Logan said, oh, well, we think they have a right to use this to improve their standing. It doesn't. It harms them further. And in terms of the first world, please sit down. It doesn't even benefit the first world as a whole, but it only benefits the rich. And this moves on to our second argument, that it benefits the rich and it's a neo-imperialistic policy that they have. In colonial times, it used to be the Western powers that went in, invaded with guns, raped and pillaged the land. And what happened? Now you have them pillaging people's bodies. When you look at the flow of natural resources during the 18th century, it was resources from the third country going to the first. When you look at the flow of organs today in the status quo, legal or not, it's often organs donated from the third country to the first. You can take Philippines as an example, where they are obviously nobody explains to them clearly about the willingness and voluntariness and what policies they need to go into, and therefore they don't have any choice. But what's worse is that end up having, even when they legalize it, you end up having a black market that was still so prevalent, the government had to ban it in 2008. Yes, sir.
Yes, here. Under status quo, we have the black market controlled by gangs, which are taking all the money, giving the peasants nothing, and tricking them into donating their organs. Under our plan, it's legal, it's supervised by the government, and the poor people can get some money which they can use to get out of poverty.
One, you can't regulate it, and two, when Chunsup was talking about Amsterdam and how the mafia controlled it, even when you do legalize it, try to regulate it, the mafia still had control, and it got to such a certain extent that Amsterdam had to shut down a lot of the prostitution areas in Amsterdam last year. Even when you legalize it and regulate it, mafias can set up fronts, mafias can legally do certain things. And so they still can't tackle that issue. Even when you legalize it, okay, they can't ensure us that, okay, well, how do they know where the organs came from is one big thing. Yeah. So you still have people that are now in the black market killing people. I've already taken 2, sit down. You already have people who have killed people illegally and got money illegally. Now you're just legalizing it. Okay, so now I can still kill people illegally, but now I get the money legally? Where's justice in that? Just because you legalize the black market doesn't mean that all the harms of the black market don't come with it. You're just now accepting something that's inherently bad. And we think, for that reason, that you should never legalize, should never legalize the black market. And therefore, what have we told you today? We've told you that choice, their whole case stands on being voluntary, being willing. They ignore the structural violence in society in first world countries and third world countries, that it benefits the rich. They keep talking about how there's choice. There is no choice when you're in poverty. Okay? Whether you're in a developed country or in a third country, there's no choice. They talk about how we should think about the benefits of those people who need those organs. Every 90 seconds, someone dies. Yes, but you know what? It'll only benefit the rich anyway. It'll benefit the rich within the poor countries because they're the only ones that can afford the organs. It'll only benefit the rich in the rich countries because they're the ones that will most likely get top priority. What's more, their whole case stands upon bodily integrity and decreasing harms. We've already highlighted to you how the harms are too great. They can't even substantiate what they mean by regulation. Are they going to accept the donated organs directly from the person going through the surgery, or are they going to go through an intermediary? Because an intermediary just keeps continuing the black market. The only difference is they can now legally get money and only increase harms of people murdering other people, like they do in China, like they do in Azerbaijan, like they do in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and they haven't addressed those issues. The harms are too great. The harms are too great for us to legalize this. Regulation is near impossible. There is no way that they can ever tell you. If they talk about supply and demand as well, you have to, that's also another problem because economic theory shows that even if you have supply and demand, it'll never be perfect supply and demand. There's no perfect employment rate. There's always asymmetric problems with information. Oh, sorry. Wrong timer, and such. So any argument they say will fall. Thank you.
Thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for her speech. To continue the debate, I call Professor Peter Kidd from the day.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, everyone. It's great to be here. I think this is an important issue because we do see every day, if we go to the bathroom, we see these little stickers posted in there like, call this number if you need a kidney, or call this number if you need a liver or something like that, right? And from what I've heard anecdotally, although I haven't actually gone and called the number and asked how much does it cost to buy a kidney, it costs something like about 30 million won, or about $30,000 if you want to go to China, illegally purchase a kidney on the black market and do this. And we do see a lot of rich people under the status quo exploiting people in China who are probably not paid very much because it's all done under the table and illegally in order to get kidneys, livers, and other organs. Perhaps even some people are killed, perhaps executed under the state, and then the state is actually getting profit. We don't really know what's going on in China. And that's exactly the point in our policy. It's very interesting that the Deputy Leader of Opposition comes up and uses words like, well, you can never guarantee that all things will perfectly happen. That's not what we're trying to guarantee at all. We don't say, I'll talk about that later, we don't say that we're trying to guarantee a perfect system where everyone who donates an organ will do so with 100% knowledge and everyone who needs one will get one. No system can be perfect. We're saying that under the status quo, all the problems of systemic oppression and structural violence that the Deputy Leader of Opposition mentioned, those already exist right now. And our policy will do something to make that system much better.
Like Amsterdam.
Now, in a minute I'll take you. Now, the opposition is making two basic mistakes in this debate. First of all, they're distorting our arguments and distorting our policy. Secondly, they are trying to narrow the debate into a simple comparison of which model, ours or theirs, will mechanically guarantee a few more organs or a few more savings of dollars in the system. And that's not true. We started with a very principled case in terms of the right to control someone's body, and we're talking about ameliorating the status quo. So in my speech, I'm going to not only be rebutting their points, but I'm also going to be talking about why our broader view of this issue is much more important. I will take your point now if you'd like to make it.
Okay, so just because we now know what's going to happen, it doesn't solve all the problems within it. Just because you legalize it doesn't make it better.
Okay, thank you. And under their model as well, under an opt-out system of mandatory donation, that won't solve all the problems either. No, we're not saying we're going to solve all the problems. We will try to make it better, as I'll show in my speech. The opt-out system, well, to rebut, before I go on to the clashes in the debate, let me rebut a little bit. Okay, first of all, I'd like to talk about their model in the opt-out system. One of their biggest and most serious accusations under our system is that somehow, although they never really explained why, these certified doctors in licensed institutions, they're going to be deceiving people, stealing their money, taking extra cuts on the side or something, even though there's government inspection going on. Now, we don't see any evidence that that's going to happen. We see under current systems in hospitals and in medically licensed places, usually people are well informed about operating procedures. Things tend to work out pretty well. Of course, sometimes there are exceptions, but everyone's got exceptions. They're also claiming under their system, somehow magically, people are going to be more educated and have more knowledge about whether they want to donate their organs or not, and therefore it's all going to work out better. Well, if you think about under opt-out systems, and you think about the so-called systemic oppression under the status quo, right now it's true. Poor people aren't very educated about exactly what it means when either they opt in or opt out of something. Opt-out system is actually a way of avoiding the problem of simply passing a legislation which removes choice from people by telling them that we're going to do this to you regardless of what you think or regardless of what you know, unless you take the trouble to actually research the issue, find out a lot about it, and decide to opt out. Well, we don't see that their system has any more benefit than our system. Yes, if poor people are going to be abused and deceived, they can be abused under our system perhaps. They can also be abused under their system. There's no comparative advantage there. We don't see any problem. Plus, again, they're trying to narrow it simply under which system is actually a little bit more efficient or better. No thank you. But they have ignored consistently the whole possibility that actually selling an organ can actually bring benefit to the seller. I think Logan said a lot about this, and I'd like to say a little bit more about that in my speech. Not only in a wealthy country, where perhaps the seller is knowledgeable and can use that money, but also in an underdeveloped country, if they're not being exploited, if they're not being paid like a tiny amount of money, which simply allows them to continue living for a few weeks or months, but if they're actually being paid a market price by a government institution, that can have a huge effect on their lives.
Sir.
No thank you. Statistics about life expectancy just in the U.S. say, according to the 2008 New York Times Almanac, that rich people tend to live an average of 3.6 times longer than people in the top 20% live 3.6 times longer than people in the bottom 20% of economic class. Now, that's probably even more so in an underdeveloped country like China. The poor people really don't have a lot of opportunities. But if you think about that price of an organ right now, 20 million, 30 million won, that's a huge amount of money to somebody in a country like that. That's going to immediately take them out of that poor category. It's going to give them all kinds of opportunities, like going to college, or like building a house that's a little more healthy, or maybe training themselves to get a better job, or investing a little bit in agriculture so they can grow more. It's going to fundamentally and radically change their life. There's going to be an extreme benefit for those people, which is going to help them move out of their poverty, which is going to give them a great amount of compensation, and is a great improvement over a system where they're simply required to give their organs for nothing. Sorry. Okay. So, I think I've rebutted any possible benefits of their model. I've explained why systemic oppression is just as big a problem for their model as for our model. And now I'd like to go and talk a little bit about the clashes in the debate. First of all, what is the role of the state? Is the role of the state to regulate and make sure there's a fair system? Or is the role of the state to tell people what they have to do? Under our model, the state regulates, it provides a fair operating field where anyone can get fair profit for their organs, where anybody can take advantage of this if they believe and they want to do it. Under their system, they're simply passing a slate of legislation which is going to make this requirement that only the people that care enough to opt out will be able to get out of it. Essentially, they're legislating organ donation. We are legislating choice. Second clash in this debate. Who is actually going to bring more and better organs to people? As Logan pointed out in his POI, if you just take organs from people when they die automatically, you're going to get a lot of old organs or damaged organs from people in accidents. They're not going to be as helpful. Under our policy, we're encouraging people to donate more organs, and we're encouraging young people perhaps to donate healthy organs like one kidney in return for the money that can give them a college education. We think that's a good choice. And finally, who has the right to decide? Is it the state? Is it the individual? We say everyone has the freedom of choice and the freedom to donate. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Whip, for your speech. I would like to invite the opposition whip speaker, Kohan Malcolm.
I feel so small.
I can donate my leg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks, Logan. That's very sweet of you to think of donating your leg to me. But would you really know the prospects, the consequences of living the rest of your life without a leg? The doctor's not going to tell you that. The doctor is going to tell you, we're going to give you painkillers because the surgery is going to be painful, but the doctor is not going to tell you that, oh, you might not be able to work as a miner, or you might not be able to work as a track runner if you decide to donate your leg. That is not a completely informed choice. And the government wants to fool you guys into believing that just by legalizing the black market that already exists, it's going to solve all the problems and it's going to ensure 100% voluntarity for all the people involved in this whole process. And that is not true, as my former two speakers have eloquently already explained to you. So what am I going to do as the whip speaker right now is I'm going to define the four clashes that I see in this debate. First of all, does it really bring the benefits that they say that it's going to bring? Is it really going to bring as much benefits as they say? Second, does legalization solve any problems? Third, is this humanly and ethically acceptable? Fourth, do the benefits outweigh the harms? Now, Peter says the role of the state is regulation and not telling people what to do. But our alternative, which is an opt-out system, which is a compulsory organ donation system at death, with an opt-out system, that is not forcing people to do something, and it is much easier to have campaigns and let people know that this is what is going to happen to you when you die unless you sign an opt-out form. That is much more easier to educate to the public rather than telling people of every single consequence that you might have, unseen potential consequences of donating your organs. Yes.
Ma'am, your second speaker comes and says that because of the system of oppression that you can't educate poor people, they're always going to be deceived. You're contradicting her.
That's true. My partner did say that, but I am saying that it's much easier to tell people of a national program that simplifies everything for people. Whereas in their policy, you would have to ensure everyone, all the sellers of organs, that they're going to be insured a fair price for their organs, and that they will be fully informed of the consequences. And they have not given us any sort of mechanism as to ensure that these people providing their organs will really be 100% informed of their choices. So let's go on into the questions one by one. Does it really bring benefits? Is there a reasonable reason to believe that the benefits are ensured? There
and haven't really given us any evidence of the benefits. How many more people will really be encouraged to sell their organs once the government legalizes selling organs for a profit? If you want to donate, even in the system that we have in Korea, or even in the opt-out system, in addition of a non-profit donation program, you can donate your organs if you feel that it's a humane and noble thing to do. You can do that in the status quo. So how many more people will be encouraged to donate their organs if they are allowed to sell for a profit? And then we also went on to explain the problems in a moment of donating at a profit.
Already in the status quo, this wasn't already mentioned, but when pharmaceutical companies run clinical test trials, we're already selling a portion of our bodies for financial profit. We already have something in the system that allows this to happen. We want to create more profit for those underprivileged and disenfranchised people in society.
How can you be sure that that farmer working in Azerbaijan will be given more than a bag of rice for his arm, for his leg, for his eyes, for his heart or brain maybe? That is not ensured by the government's policy today, and that is why we oppose the government's proposal. Again, I want to point out an inconsistency in the government side. They keep arguing and trying to persuade you about the benefits to the seller and the buyers. But then they also argue about the right to do harmful things to yourself. So does it harm the organ donator, or does it benefit the organ donator? They haven't really weighed the benefits and harms, so thank you. And we say that the harms have been proven, whereas the benefits have not been proven until this point. And I pointed out to you that there are unseen potential harms that organ donators are not aware of. So the consequences of living without a limb, those things are not going to be told to you by a doctor when you go walk into that doctor's office to get surgery. Second class, does legalization solve problems? Ladies and gentlemen, legalization is not a magic spell. They try to persuade you by saying they're going to have agencies, legal, proven agencies and brokers that facilitate this process. No, thank you. But legalization does not solve the problem of the structure of the organ market. There are still going to be brokers. There are still going to be companies facilitating this process. And these companies and brokers will still be profit-driven. It doesn't make that much of a difference from what we see in the status quo with black markets. Mafias taking over and abducting children in India and Azerbaijan to kill them and sell organs to first world countries at their profit, whereas people are being killed and the donators are not receiving a fair price for their organs, and they don't even know the consequences that could happen as a result of their donation. So it doesn't change the structure, and another problem is that you still cannot completely trace where the organs came from once they have been extracted from the body. So there are some crucial loopholes in the government's proposal that they try to portray as perfect and bubbly. Third class, is this humanly and ethically acceptable? Yoon Sung-won has explained to you about the structural violence that this government's proposal will bring about. What we already see in the status quo is poor people, even in developed countries, and then poor people living in poor countries selling their organs because it seems like the easy way to make a little bit of money, even if it doesn't compensate for the harms that they will have to face as a result of donating their organs. So that's structural violence is still there, even if you try to regulate it, and you cannot ensure that people will be compensated fairly enough for the consequences that they will face. So it's not really a choice if you're a poor person or you're living in a poor country or you're undereducated, so you do not know the consequences. Last clash, do the benefits outweigh the harms? Even the harms of an opt-out system have been seen, and they have been proven to be less harmful than what they propose is freely buying and selling organs. So the benefits are not big enough, and we cannot ensure how many more organs we will have as a result of this free market for organs. So therefore, we believe that the opposition has done a much better job in proving that the harms far outweigh the benefits of free organ trade. Thank you.
Now I'd like to invite the opposition reply speakers. identified by the government team in this debate was that people die from lack of organ donation. Firstly, because of illness itself, because they don't have enough organs to live on. And secondly, because there's a rampant black market that is thriving because of the lack of a legitimate market. Now, let's look into that logic, ladies and gentlemen, look into their solution. Their solution into how to get rid of this black market that is not legitimate, because the government said it's not legitimate, is by creating a market that the government says is legitimate. Now, first of all, it doesn't really make sense because both markets thrive on the idea of capitalism. It thrives on the idea of actions that are only taken because it's profit-driven. It relies on people and their selfishness for the will of money itself, ladies and gentlemen. The biggest difference from the government's model and the opposition is that on the opposition we believe in equality. We believe that a person who is dead already shouldn't be holding on to their own organ if in a different situation, if they want to have an organ transplant. That was very clear from the very beginning of this debate. Now, what the government team has been saying is that, first of all, we are going to make it feasible. We are going to make sure that there are less black market, if not no black market, and we're going to make sure that people actually benefit from this legitimate market. Ladies and gentlemen, they still, to this point in this debate, they have not been able to tell you that how are these actors that are working for the black market are going to be taken out of the legitimate market, ladies and gentlemen. They have not been able to tell you how these corrupt people are going to actually be replaced by better people that are willing to work for humanity and saving lives. No, the government, what they're saying is that people who are rich can pay for organs, pay for lives at other people's costs, and the government is going to just make sure that that money is being transferred from an individual to another individual. Now, with this issue, the opposition has been able to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that first of all, the issue of bodily integrity itself is not acceptable in the case of irreversible choice. When it comes to a choice that will cost you your life, your family's financial needs, and your whole quality of life for the rest of your life, or perhaps even your life itself, and you can die from the surgery. And that is a lot harder to educate to the people, and that is a lot harder to tell the doctors to say correctly to these individuals when those doctors are going to make money out of this transaction, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm very ashamed that Logan Ashok came up here and said, yes, people should be able to sell their organs for other people as long as they get paid, ladies and gentlemen. Now, secondly, what the government has not been able to tell and prove is the feasibility of this market. But throughout the debate, the government team has been telling you consistently that yes, there is black market, yes, there are evil people, yes, there are a big demand for the organ of human organs, ladies and gentlemen. What the problem is that the government model only tries to increase the demand, not get to the supply of the organs, whereas the opposition makes sure that there are supplies for the people that are inside this inside this nation. What the government does is that if you actually have a legitimate market for organs organs, other people from other countries can actually fly in and make sure that they get organs as long as that monetary transaction is made, ladies and gentlemen. Whereas the opposition is only trying to make sure that there are enough supplies of organs for the people in the country itself, and make sure that there is no need for a market, legitimate or black, in that country anymore. So I have to ask you at the end of the debate, when the government tells you that what opposition is doing is taking away the choice because they're not going to tell you that you can actually opt out of the system, which is not true. Is that actually better or worse than the government team that gives choice to the rich people and makes sure that the rich people can give their money to people who choose to give up their organs and give up their lives and their quality of life and the ones around them? Thank you.
Thank you for your speech. Now I'd like to invite the last speaker of this debate.
Ladies and gentlemen and people who are still awake, as I said at the start of this debate, this is essentially a debate about comparing solutions towards a problem, situation which everybody agrees is dire. half an hour from now, someone else on the waiting list in the United States of America will die. And probably somebody in Singapore, where they do have mandatory organ donation, will also die. Many people will die because their organs fail. And we need to find a solution so less people die. So we very serious. We had two solutions. On this side of the house, we say, use the free market that seems to work. We crash down. So we are the winners of the Cold War. And we recognize that people do something for something in return and profit. And this system exists in the black market, and more people are being harmed because of it. Let's trade organs. They said, no, let's take a mandatory, compulsory organ donation system where you can opt out. And let's compare those two systems, and I'll compare it on the basis of what? On the notion of choice, on the notion of whether it benefits the rich, it benefits the poor, and lastly, on whether it benefits sick people, the people who will die. Now, essentially, the first thing we must do is put both of these systems in the same context. They say we can run this system in Singapore, but they keep running our system in places like Azerbaijan and China. And we think that's unfair. If you run their system in China, mandatory organ donation means cutting people's organs and taking it from them. So their mandatory organ donation system applied globally will create far more problems than our system applied globally. So if we say you want to compare how both this system works, compare it in the same country. If you're going to compare it in Singapore, put ours in Singapore too. And we think with the extreme amount of regulation that exists in Singapore and the fair enough level of education, it will work in a fairly, very, very well regulated manner. They ban chewing gum, they can make sure these things work. Let's look at this notion, firstly, of this notion of choice. They say people are not fully informed, this is a choice that's irreversible, therefore there is no way we can completely do it. I said in the start, we make all kinds of irreversible choices. The choice to smoke and keep smoking is one that is irreversible. The damage that you do upon yourself is irreversible. Athletes who go through, like you become a gymnast, your body is stunted. That harm is irreversible. A lot of things that you do are irreversible. Many kinds of surgery, plastic surgery, appendix removal, Botox, all those things are irreversible to an extent. And if we can trust people to do that, why not trust everybody? Oh, wait a minute, now it's because it's poor people. We can't trust poor people to make irreversible choices because they don't get educated. Because the doctors, when they talk to poor people, they lie to them. When they talk to rich people, they tell them the truth. We say, that doesn't work. Well, not in Singapore, where both of these models are happening. They tell the truth to everyone. We say, under our system, people willingly decide, I am going to go and do this. We say that implies a greater amount of self-knowledge and awareness because you made up your mind to go to somewhere and to do it versus under their system where people are automatically under that system. So if I am poor or if I'm undereducated, one day when I die, people will suddenly come into my room and take my organs. And my family will get really upset because they don't know about it. And those things cause all those huge problems, everything. That's an issue. They say there's no trace mechanism, blah, blah, blah. But in the start of the debate, IOM says this works in Florida. We'll use the same system that works in Florida. Organs are not diamonds. Organs have DNA. You can tell who it comes from. It doesn't disappear into the mist. The second thing is on benefiting rich and poor people. We say modern medicine, like organ transplants, by definition benefit the rich. Those people are the ones on the waiting list and have more access to organs to begin with. What our system does, it means there'll be less rich people on the waiting list taking organs away from other people who can't afford to buy them. Those people will get organs from people who die. And we think that benefits poor people more. It doesn't wholly benefit the rich. So do rich people can buy organs? Yes, they can. But that means they will go off the waiting list and free organs go to poor people. We also benefit poor people. We give people, and people in the middle class and all kinds of ranges, who want to get money from selling their organs, which they don't and they consistently ignore. Finally, we say it benefits sick people. We asked them this question a couple of times throughout their speeches. Mandatory organ donations only mean you get organs from people who die, most of the time out of organ failure, or people who get crashed in car accidents and their organs are all compressed. Where do you get useful organs from people who are willing to give them? Again, no answer. So if both the systems were applied in Singapore, ladies and gentlemen, ours would work better.
정민, 버튼 기다리고 있어요.